The eternal supremacy, a warship the size of a small moon, slipped out of hyperspace at the edge of Sol system. Its black hull reflected nothing, a void against the backdrop of distant stars. It was not alone. An entire fleet accompanied it, sleek destroyers bristling with plasma lances, carriers housing swarms of fighters, and a dreadnought whose mere presence had cowed entire planets into submission. Grand Strategist Grylock stood before the command deck's panoramic viewport, arms folded behind his back, his violet eyes scanning the distant blue-green planet. Earth, a backwater world, technologically infantile, barely reaching the threshold of interstellar relevance. A planet of weak, short-lived creatures who had, for some inexplicable reason, developed an alarming level of aggression for a species their size. He had read the reports. Their history was one of endless war, conquest, and destruction. It was almost comical how they had wiped each other out over invisible lines drawn on a map. Their weapons were crude, based on primitive chemical reactions and kinetic force rather than the elegance of plasma or antimatter. Still, the Senate had insisted on the formality of contact before subjugation. A waste of time, in Grylock's opinion. But procedure was procedure. "Begin transmission," he commanded. A signal pulsed across the void, aimed at the planet below. It would be received on all frequencies, translated instantly into whatever primitive dialect these creatures spoke. "Attention, inhabitants of the third planet of the Sol system." Grylock's voice resonated with the practiced authority of a conqueror. "You are now subjects of the Zorvax dominion. Your compliance is expected. Resistance is futile. Prepare for integration." He folded his arms, waiting. Normally, this was the part where panicked diplomats scrambled to their transmission devices, where planetary leaders groveled, offering their unconditional surrender. Instead, nothing happened. A pause. Grylock's left eye twitched. He glanced at his communication officer, a lanky Zorvax, with an uncertain look on his face. "Did they receive the transmission?" Grylock asked. "Yes, Grand Strategist," the officer confirmed. "Multiple receivers picked up the signal. However, no reply has been issued." Grylock's fingers curled against his palm. How utterly disrespectful. He had encountered stubborn civilizations before, but to be outright ignored? That was a new insult. "Send it again." The transmission was repeated, but again, no response came. The humans were either too primitive to comprehend their new reality or willfully ignoring it. "Perhaps they lacked the means to communicate at our level," suggested Admiral Varkin, his voice edged with amusement. "We should dispatch a fleet to their surface and—" "They are not that primitive," Grylock snapped. "They have satellites, orbital stations. They have the means to respond. They are simply refusing." The arrogance. A deep, bubbling irritation rose in his chest. He had subjugated entire worlds with a single command, cowed militaries before they could even mobilize. And here, this insignificant rock dared to. "Incoming transmission," the officer said suddenly. Grylock straightened. Finally, the screen flickered, and the face of a human male appeared. His hair was graying at the temples, his uniform crisp but simple, bearing no elaborate decorations. His expression, however, was not one of fear or awe. It was casual, bored even. "This is General Jack Reynolds of Earth's United Military Command," the man said, taking a sip from a cup. "What can I do for you?" The sheer lack of formality made Grylock's mandibles clench. "You are now subjects of the Zorvax dominion," Grylock repeated. "Your compliance is non-negotiable. Prepare for integration." The human blinked. Then, to Grylock's increasing fury, he laughed. "Oh man," Reynolds exhaled, shaking his head. "You guys really do the whole dramatic conqueror thing. Huh? Let me guess, ancient interstellar empire, never been defeated, got a superiority complex the size of Jupiter." Grylock narrowed his eyes. "You misunderstand. This is not a negotiation." "No, I get it," Reynolds said, setting his drink down. "You've got fancy ships, some real shiny-looking weapons, and you figure you can just roll up and take over. Seen it before." Grylock's lips curled in frustration. "You have not seen anything like the Zorvax dominion." "Buddy," Reynolds leaned in, his grin lazy. Do you know how many times people have tried to conquer this planet? A pause. 3 times, Reynolds said. And all 3 times it was by humans. And all 3 times it went about as well as you'd expect. Grylock inhaled sharply through his nostrils. You presume to compare your petty territorial squabbles to the might of the Dominion? Oh no, I'm saying you don't seem to get it, Reynolds said, pointing a finger at the screen. We are a species whose history is basically just one long string of increasingly dumb wars. You think you're the first alien race we've ever dealt with? You're not. That was an outright lie. Grylock had checked. Earth had no record of contact with any known interstellar civilization. Yet this human said it with such confidence, such audacity, that for a fleeting second, Grylock hesitated. Then Reynolds leaned back, stretching. Look, you seem busy, and I've got a meeting in 20, so here's the deal. You are in no position to dictate. Shoo, Reynolds held up a finger. Let me finish. We're going to ignore your whole surrender or die thing for now. We're busy. Taxes, elections, sports season. You know how it is. Grylock's vision blurred at the sheer insolence. You dare. Also, Reynolds added, you might want to check your sensors. Looks like a couple of our satellites have already picked up your ships. That means the internet's going to know soon. And hoo boy, you do not want the internet involved. Grylock had no idea what that meant. Reynolds gave him a mock salute. All right, big guy. Good talk. Catch you later. The screen cut to black. The silence that followed was absolute. Admiral Varkin was the first to speak. That did not go as expected. Grylock exhaled through his teeth. The fury rolling inside him was almost unbearable. Prepare the fleet, he commanded coldly. If they will not surrender willingly, we will educate them on the cost of defiance. The humans thought this was a joke, that they could laugh in the face of a galactic empire. They would soon learn otherwise. Grand strategist Grylock had witnessed many conflicts in his time, and they all followed a predictable pattern. A species was contacted. Their rulers postured and made empty threats, and then their forces crumbled within the first hour of battle. Those who survived either submitted or were erased. That was the natural order of things. And yet, as he stood on the command deck of the Eternal Supremacy, watching a live feed of human news broadcasts, he felt a growing sense of unease. The humans were laughing at them, not cowering, not trembling in fear, laughing. They had taken his declaration of war and turned it into some kind of sick joke. Within hours of his fleet's arrival, their global communications network, this chaotic thing they called the Internet, had exploded with mockery. They had turned his very words into absurd images, plastering his face onto their crude entertainment visuals, comparing his empire to what they called Saturday morning cartoon villains. He stared at one particular transmission in disbelief. A popular news anchor, barely able to contain his laughter, read out the Galactic Dominion's ultimatum, as if it were a late-night comedy routine. So, let me get this straight, the anchor said between chuckles. A bunch of aliens showed up, gave us the whole "you are now our subject" speech, and then got upset when nobody took them seriously? I mean, I get it, we've had a rough few decades, but this is just sad. The audience erupted in laughter. Grylock's fist clenched. We should silence them, Admiral Varkin suggested from his place at the war table. Their media networks are unprotected. We could shut down their communications in seconds. No, Grylock growled. This mockery will not last. When they witness the power of the Dominion firsthand, they will understand what they have provoked. His patience had worn thin. This was no longer about conquest. This was about respect. The Dominion had crushed empires before, civilizations that had spanned thousands of light years. What chance did a single, unremarkable planet have against them? The fleet descended upon the solar system, their ships moving with cold, military precision. The plan was simple: overwhelm Earth's primitive defenses in a single stroke, disable their planetary infrastructure, and force their leaders into submission. They would use measured force, enough to cripple, but not enough to destroy. The Dominion needed Earth's industries intact for integration. But as they reached the final approach, something peculiar happened. Humanity did nothing. No global evacuation. No desperate last stand. No armada waiting in orbit to challenge them. The silence was unsettling. "Where is their fleet?" Varkin asked, scanning the sensor readings. "Surely they have warships." "They do," the sensor officer confirmed. "But they haven't launched anything into orbit. All readings indicate their forces are still on the surface." Still on the surface? Grylock's brow furrowed. That made no sense. Even the most outmatched civilizations launched something in their defense. Fighters, drones, anything to slow the inevitable. Why weren't the humans reacting? A new transmission request flashed across the main display. The origin point was a location called the Pentagon. "Put it through," Grylock commanded. The screen flickered, revealing General Jack Reynolds once more. He was leaning back in a chair, chewing something. It took Grylock a second to recognize the crinkling sound. Food packaging. Popcorn. The man was eating popcorn. Reynolds gestured lazily. "Hey there, Zorvax dudes. What you up to?" Grylock glared. "We are about to strike. This is your last opportunity to surrender." Reynolds smirked. "Oh yeah? You sure you want to do that?" The sheer arrogance of the statement made Grylock's blood boil. "We have given you every chance to submit peacefully. You mock us, you ignore our warnings, and now you sit idly by while your world faces destruction. Do you not comprehend what is about to happen?" Reynolds tilted his head, pretending to think. Yeah, I get it. Big bad space empire, super scary. But I gotta ask, have you guys done your homework on us?" That made Grylock pause. Reynolds grinned. "See, I was gonna give you a warning, but honestly, you guys came in real rude, so we figured we'd just let you figure it out the hard way." Grylock straightened. "Enough games." He waved a hand, and a crimson symbol flared to life on the command panel. Fire. Across the fleet, the first wave of plasma bombardments launched toward the surface. It was over. Or, at least, it should have been. Grylock watched, expecting to see massive destruction, cities erased in an instant. Instead, his screens lit up with error messages. "Impact failure," the weapons officer stammered. "The projectiles, something happened." "Clarify," Grylock ordered sharply. The officer fumbled with the controls. "We don't know. The energy signatures just disappeared mid-flight." Grylock's fingers dug into the railing. Impossible. Plasma bombardments did not simply vanish. Reynolds laughed on the screen. "Oh, right, I forgot to mention," he said, looking far too amused. "We have these neat things called jamming fields. You know, the kind of stuff you use to mess with targeting systems. Turns out, we figured out a way to use them on plasma weapons." "Neat, huh?" Grylock felt his breath catch. That wasn't possible. Plasma weaponry was energy-based. It couldn't be intercepted by conventional means. Unless. Also, Reynolds continued, licking butter from his fingers, "we may or may not have figured out how to disrupt FTL communications in a localized area. So if you were planning on calling for backup, yeah, not gonna happen." Grylock's eyes widened. That would explain why the emergency signals weren't transmitting. They had been cut off. "This," Varkin said, voice tight, "is a trap." "Ding, ding, ding," Reynolds said, grinning. "We have a winner." That was when the first counterstrike hit. It wasn't a laser. It wasn't an energy pulse. It was a railgun slug the size of a bus. A streak of white-hot metal tore through the void, striking one of the Dominion's destroyers at near-relativistic speeds. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. The ship didn't explode. It shattered, splitting in two as the sheer kinetic force ripped through it like wet paper. Debris spiraled out, colliding with a nearby cruiser. Grylock's mouth went dry. More slugs followed. Earth's hidden defenses, massive railgun platforms disguised as civilian satellites, unleashed hell upon the fleet. The Dominion shields, built for energy resistance, were utterly ineffective against hyper-accelerated solid metal. The fleet was being torn apart. "We need to retreat," a bridge officer shouted. "No," Grylock said through gritted teeth. "Deploy countermeasures. Target their launch sites." A warning siren blared. Then the nukes hit. It wasn't a single detonation. It was a wave of ballistic missiles launched from deep within Earth's surface, arcing through the sky like spears of judgment. They weren't flashy. They weren't elegant. But they worked. Explosions rippled through the fleet, the sheer concussive force ripping hulls apart, sending ships careening into one another. The eternal supremacy rocked violently as an explosion tore through its lower decks. Grylock's breathing was heavy, his mind racing. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't just underestimation. They had walked into a death trap. Reynolds, now leaning forward with an almost mocking level of concern, tapped the screen. So, listen, since I know you guys probably aren't used to getting your asses kicked, let me give you some advice. Grylock gritted his teeth, his rage now eclipsed by a deep, gnawing dread. Reynolds' grin widened. You might want to start running. The feed cut out. And as the burning remains of the Dominion's once mighty fleet drifted through Earth's orbit, Grylock finally understood. They had never been the predators. They had always been the prey. The Zorvak's Dominion had never known fear. It had ruled for millennia, its banners stretching across the stars, its fleets unmatched. Its enemies, once proud and defiant, had crumbled before the relentless tide of conquest. Entire civilizations had surrendered at the mere sight of a Dominion dreadnought. Fear was something the Dominion instilled in others, not something it felt. Until now, the Senate chamber on Zorvax Prime was in chaos. The circular amphitheater, usually a place of controlled debate and cold calculation, had become a war zone of panic-stricken voices. Holograms flickered with reports, emergency transmissions from the remnants of the once invincible fleet, each one more damning than the last. The destruction had been absolute. The entire invasion force had been shattered. The flagship Eternal Supremacy, a name that once spoke of its unchallenged dominance, was now little more than a smoldering wreck drifting in Sol System's asteroid belt. Half the fleet had been obliterated by crude but brutally effective kinetic weaponry. The other half had fled, limping into hyperspace, their shields and hulls torn apart by nuclear fire. Grand Strategist Grylock stood before the assembled Senate, his face carved from stone, his hands clenched behind his back. He had expected outrage, but what he faced now was far worse. Fear. The Emperor himself, Lord Zathar, was present, seated upon the towering throne at the highest point of the chamber. His deep blue robes, woven with the insignias of conquest, now felt like relics of a forgotten time. You assured us, Zathar's voice cut through the noise, slow and deliberate, that the humans were primitive. Grylock did not flinch, though the weight of the words was enough to crush him. They are, he said, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. The chamber erupted again, voices rising like waves in a storm. Then explain how an entire fleet was annihilated. Senator Vorsk bellowed, his frilled crest flaring in fury. Grylock inhaled slowly. Their technology is crude, yes. Their weapons are archaic, but they have mastered them in ways we did not anticipate. Mastered them? Another senator sneered. You mean they used ballistic weapons instead of plasma? You mean they still rely on nuclear fission? This is what bested us. Grylock lifted his gaze. Yes. The chamber fell into stunned silence. They're not bound by our rules, Grylock continued. Their weapons are not elegant, but they are effective. Their strategies are not refined, but they are unpredictable. They did not meet us in open battle because they had no intention of fighting our war. They made us fight theirs. He let the words settle, let them sink into the minds of the gathered senators, into the Emperor himself. Then he delivered the final, damning truth. And they enjoyed it. The murmurs turned into whispers, a quiet horror spreading through the chamber. They enjoyed the battle? Zathar asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Grylock nodded. The humans have fought among themselves for their entire existence. Conflict is not an interruption to them. It is a constant. We believed we were bringing war to an inferior race. His jaw tightened. Instead, we handed it to masters. The weight of the truth settled over the chamber like a death sentence. Then a new voice spoke, one that sent a fresh chill down Grylock's spine. They are coming. The speaker was an intelligence officer, one of the few who had survived the retreat. His skin was paler than usual, his usual confidence replaced with something that looked dangerously close to terror. They have reverse-engineered our technology. They have begun launching their own warships into space. We are no longer dealing with a planetary species. His eyes flickered around the room, taking in the sea of stunned expressions. The humans have entered the interstellar stage. Grylock's breath was slow and measured. It was inevitable. They will retaliate, the intelligence officer continued. Our analysts confirm that they have begun testing FTL drives, likely based on salvaged Dominion wreckage. They have adapted their railgun platforms for deep space engagements. And he hesitated. Speak, Zather commanded. The officer swallowed. They have, somehow, managed to weaponize hyperspace anomalies. A ripple of disbelief spread through the chamber. That was impossible. Hyperspace was not a weapon. It was a method of travel, a medium that required careful navigation and meticulous calculations. The idea that a primitive species had found a way to weaponize it was absurd. And yet, nothing about the humans had followed the rules. How long? Grylock asked. The officer's throat bobbed as he swallowed. Days. Maybe less. Zather's face darkened. The Emperor of the Dominion had never known defeat. He had never known vulnerability. But now he looked almost old. They seek vengeance, Zather said, his voice low. No, Grylock corrected. They seek entertainment. The chamber fell silent again. The humans weren't just responding to an attack. They were enjoying this. They were taking the time to strategize, to refine, to improve, not out of necessity, but because war was fun for them. And now they had an enemy worthy of their attention. We cannot allow this, a senator hissed. We must negotiate. Grylock turned his head sharply. You would kneel before them? I would ensure our survival, the senator snapped. Our survival will not come from surrender, Grylock said. They will not stop at our borders. They will not be content with a single victory. We have made them curious. They will want to see how far they can push us. A deep silence settled over the chamber. Then an alarm blared. The intelligence officer's display flickered, the Dominion's orbital defense grid lighting up with alerts. The chamber's main holographic display shifted, revealing real-time data. An object had entered the system. Not an armada, not a fleet. A single human vessel. The room tensed. Grylock stepped forward, patched the transmission through. The chamber's main screen flickered, and once again, General Jack Reynolds appeared. He was sitting in a command chair, a mug of something steaming in his hand. He was smiling. Hey there, Zorvax folks, Reynolds greeted casually. Just thought I'd check in. See how you're holding up. Zather rose slowly from his throne, eyes burning with barely contained fury. You dare. Oh, yeah, we dare, Reynolds interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. See, I figured since we haven't heard from you in a bit, you might be, rethinking your life choices? A deep, suffocating silence filled the chamber. We could obliterate your ship right now, Zather growled. Yeah, you could try, Reynolds said, sipping his drink. But see, here's the thing. You didn't. He let that sit. Now, I could make a lot of demands. Maybe tell you guys to surrender or hand over some of your fancier tech or whatever. But honestly, he leaned forward, his grin widening. I just wanted to see the look on your faces. Grylock felt something cold slide down his spine. This was not how enemies behaved. This was not how the conquered spoke. Reynolds took another sip. Anyway, we'll be dropping by soon. Thought I'd give you a heads up. Wouldn't want you thinking we're rude or anything. The transmission cut out. Silence. It lingered, stretching through the vast chamber, heavy and unrelenting. The war was no longer about pride. It was no longer about proving dominance. The humans had turned it into something else. A game. And the Dominion had just become their favorite new pastime. The stars had changed. For thousands of years, the Zorvax Dominion had ruled the galaxy with an unshakable grip, their fleets unchallenged, their laws absolute. Planets bent the knee before them, and species older and wiser than humanity had folded under their rule without a fight. Now they were silent. No war fleets patrolled the hyperlanes. No grand proclamations of conquest echoed across the galactic networks. The once golden banners of the Dominion now hung limp, drenched in the cold sweat of realization. The humans were here. The USS Liberty, a human warship fashioned from the bones of their old aircraft carriers, hung in orbit over Zorvax Prime. It was nothing like the sleek, elegant vessels of the Dominion. It was ugly angular, built with layers of redundant armor and loaded with absurdly oversized kinetic cannons. It didn't glide, it loomed, a blunt instrument of destruction designed by a species that had no patience for elegance when explosions were an option. Grand Strategist Grylock stood on the surface below, staring up at the vessel through the towering windows of the Imperial Citadel. His claws tapped against his armored gauntlet, his mind moving through the final remnants of his pride, sifting through what little remained of the Dominion's dignity. It had taken only one battle for them to see the truth. Now, there was no war, no final, desperate stand, just waiting. The doors behind him hissed open, and the room filled with the heavy, deliberate footfalls of a human. He knew, without turning, who it was. He had seen too much of the man already. General Jack Reynolds approached with the same easy confidence he had displayed since their first encounter. His uniform, a simple dark blue military ensemble, lacked the ornate flourishes the Dominion draped themselves in. There were no medals, no towering pauldrons. And yet, as he took a sip from the ever-present mug in his hand, the casual weight of his presence was enough to crush the room into silence. "Nice planet you got here," Reynolds remarked, looking out over the cityscape of Zorvax Prime. His tone was light, but Grylock heard the weight beneath it. Big towers, shiny spires, real, grand-looking. Grylock didn't respond. Reynolds took another sip. "Tell me something, Grylock. Did you ever think about what would happen if you lost?" The Grand Strategist turned slowly, his violet eyes locking onto Reynolds with a gaze that had once commanded legions. "The Dominion does not think in terms of loss." Reynolds smirked. "Yeah, I figured." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. "They won't accept this," Grylock finally said, voice quieter than he intended. "The people, the senators, the military. Even if I surrender, they will fight." Reynolds nodded. "I know." Grylock's eyes narrowed. "Then why are you here?" Reynolds exhaled, setting his mug down on the nearest table. "Because I also know that you're not a fool. And that's rare in your line of work." Grylock clenched his jaw. There was no mockery in Reynolds' voice. No arrogance. Just a quiet, unsettling certainty. "We've done our research," Reynolds continued. "Your empire, hell, your whole species, is built on the idea that no one can challenge you. You've never had to think about an opponent who could actually win. That's why this is so hard for you." Grylock exhaled slowly. "You came here to gloat." Reynolds' grin widened. "Nah, that's just a bonus." The Grand Strategist turned away again, looking back out at the city. Even from here, he could see the way the people were changing. The once proud Zorvax citizens, who had once walked with the arrogance of conquerors, now moved with something else. Caution. Awareness. For the first time in thousands of years, they were afraid of something bigger than themselves. "What now?" Grylock asked, though the question tasted bitter on his tongue. Reynolds picked up his mug again, taking another slow sip before answering. "Well," he said, stretching the word like he was savoring it. "That depends on you." Grylock frowned. "I do not see many options." "Sure you do," Reynolds replied. "You could surrender. Fully. Publicly. Tell your people the war is over. That the Dominion is done." Grylock's claws flexed. The words felt like poison. "Or," Reynolds continued, his voice dipping lower, "you could fight." Grylock's gaze snapped back to him. Reynolds shrugged. "You could keep pushing. Rally your forces. Drag your people into a war they cannot win. Watch your fleets turn to scrap, your cities burn, your entire species become a footnote in human history." He stepped closer, his voice turning sharp. "Because let me tell you something, Grylock. We're done playing defense. You came to our world. You brought your banners, your fleets, your ultimatums. You tried to treat us like every other species you've crushed beneath your boots." A slow grin spread across his face. "But we're not like them. And now we're here." Grylock's breath came slower now, deeper. There was no threat in Reynolds' tone. No malice. Just fact. Humanity had won. The war was over before it had truly begun. And now the Dominion, the great and mighty Dominion, had only two choices: submission or extinction. Grylock exhaled, turning to face him fully. "If I surrender, what happens to my people?" Reynolds nodded, as if the question had been inevitable. "That depends on how much of a pain in the ass you make this for us." Grylock let out a breath that was almost a laugh. The humans were different. He had seen it in their battle strategies, in their history, in the way they enjoyed war rather than endured it. They weren't conquerors in the traditional sense. They were predators. And the Dominion had walked straight into their den. For a long moment, Grylock said nothing. Then, finally, he stepped forward, his shoulders rolling back, his spine straightening. "I will speak with the Emperor." Reynolds gave him a slow nod. "Good call." There was no celebration, no grand moment of triumph, just the quiet acknowledgement of an empire bowing its head to a species it had once dismissed. As Reynolds turned to leave, he paused at the door. "Oh, and one last thing." Grylock raised a brow. The human grinned. "Welcome to the Galactic community." Then he was gone. Grylock turned back to the window, staring out at the horizon. The stars had changed, and the Dominion would never be the same again.